We continue this year's celebration of the season of emancipation with an act of great courage. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time. In this week's program, we will take a look at Washington Franklin. Interestingly enough, the two leading historians have opposing views.
The Franklin case is complex because of the nature of the society and as the rebellion, the revolution. We know who he is. We know he's the son of a sugar planter.
By blood is part of the Baileys, etc. Because his mother Leah is a slave. His father was the plantation owner. And here's the other thing. He was one of the few slave children who were baptized in the church, the St. Philip Parish Church. His name and the name of his mother Leah is right there. Most unusual, King David. St. Philip is a very unusual parish on the whole.
We know that he is dispossessed by his white brothers. Father dies, writes a will, leaves some property for his mulatto son. Mulatto son doesn't get the property. He is disgruntled. His white half-brothers use the legal system to nullify his entitlement and leave him in the cold. He's a man, therefore, of some educational training. He's been a free man, father's favorite, dispossessed. His mind is clearly now divided in relation to the society in which he's living. We also know from the colonizer's record that he is close, that he had lived his life close to the black community. His mother is obviously a black woman, and he is living close to the family of his mother and his friends in the black community. So he is described as being a part of a rebel cause.
Historian Bobby Morris holds the view that Washington Franklin assumed an even greater role in the rebellion.
But then I went now and found that Franklin was a member of the Free Colored movement. There was a Free Colored group that used to go to get rights for the Free Colored. And if you're looking for rights for the Free Colored, obviously you're looking for rights for the slaves. So isn't that the man was just in the rebellion, but he was out there active too, he's an activist.
Before the rebellion, we see Franklin entering into the record of Barbados. He enters into the record as a person who is in the parish of St. Philip.
Study the Franklins, they're very independent people. Very independent people, but look at what he named the guy. Joseph, that led the Israeli or the Egypt. Pitt, William Pitt, who was one of the most revolutionary of that day English leaders. He was driving against the aristocracy and bringing the merchant class, etc., the middle class people into politics. And Washington, who led in the revolt against England.
UWI's Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, continues the discussion based on his research and findings.
And from time to time, abusive of prominent and respected white people. So in his disenfranchisement, he is clearly in a state of mind that forces him to make comments and to live a life which the white elite in that parish were offended by. So he's a marked man, okay? That's the first thing about Franklin. He's a marked man. We do not know enough details about his relationship to Bussa. But what we do know is that when that rebellion started, the white community went for Franklin and put a rope around his neck. Now, did they believe that they were cutting off the head of the revolution that was now taking place around them? Did they believe that? Or was this an opportunity to lynch a man who they really wanted to lynch all along, but could not because of the law, and they had an opportunity? Now, let's fast forward. If Franklin had been at the center of the military organization, in addition to being sympathetic, because we assume he was sympathetic, he knew these people, he was sympathetic, he had reasons to be. So let's assume that in addition to that, he was also involved at an organizational level. It would have been reasonable to see his name appearing through the subsequent records, because the black community would have had no reason to erase him from their record, because that is not how the history works. They would not have erased him from their records. They would have canonized him. They would have celebrated him even more, so that when the black newspaper, the Times, emerged, and then we get the reference to General Bussa and all of that, nowhere in that record is Franklin. Nowhere in that description in the black newspaper, the 60th anniversary, Franklin is not involved in that conversation. Had Franklin been a prominent leader in that rebellion, and had he been executed for it, the black community would have given him the credit that is due to him. They would have mentioned, they would have, in the evangelical sense, they would have called his name.
Historian Bobby Morris emphasizes the importance of research and the examination of multiple sources from which he draws his conclusion. Now, to illustrate this, he uses another example of research and asks some pertinent questions.
And when you feel you have a sufficiency of information, because we talk about triangulation, quite frankly, if you're calling something a fact, you should get one source, two sources, three sources. And when you get from three different sources the same thing, you've triangulated. This is a fact. You know? Once is just chance, second would be coincidence, three things. So if I find Bussa in 1806, and I know about him in 1816, and I find some information after that, I'm triangulating. This is the man, this is the person we're talking about. So tell the truth, the 1876 information found in the Times, etc., was triangulating that Bussa is the person. That's the third source, basically, that Bussa was held in high regard. How are you going to tell me, though, that Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin, and by the way, one of our leading historians, Hilton Vaughn, in 1972, had written a series in the Democrat on Washington Franklin. Excellent article. You can't flaw the man in terms of the research that he did. But then I went now and found that Franklin was a member of the Free Colored movement. There was a Free Colored group that used to go to get rights for the Free Colored. And if you're looking for rights for the Free Colored, obviously you're looking for rights for the slaves. So isn't that the man was just in the rebellion, but he was out there active too. He's an activist. A man called Sinclair wrote a handbook. And in that handbook, quite frankly, Mr. Sinclair said, 1913, he said, Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin, a free-colored man, conceived and planned the outbreak. There's no question in his mind about that. But he also said that Bussa, an African, was the leader of the outbreak. So he separated the person who conceived and planned, the strategist, with the man who executed. I wanted to ask the question by research. How come an African in 1816 when slavery had been going on from the 17th century and slaves were being bred over and over again, how come an African is leading a revolt and not a Creole, a man born in Barbados of African descent? So then Sinclair said that Basso was an African. I took him to mean that he was of African descent. So I can only ask the question, how come these slaves called Basso, children from 5 years old and so on, are at those plantations? How come there's not a relationship between Franklin and these slaves as a colored man, a free colored boy?
The importance of research and, as he said, triangulation. Vice-Chancellor Sir Hilary Beckles maintains his position, and to strengthen his argument, he continues by telling us exactly who called the name Franklin.
But the only people who called his name were the colonizers. They were the ones who called his name. They were the ones who, and on the first occasion they called his name was in the Assembly's Commission report. And if you read that report carefully, they were justifying his murder. They were not really ascribing to him leadership. They were trying to extricate themselves out of the fact that they murdered an innocent man.
To draw the conclusion that Franklin was hanged based on some grudge of some unknown personal reason, this is what the Hillary School is saying. And everybody who belongs to that school says these things. Naturally, all of them, when you read them, they speak off the same hymn book, because nobody can challenge Hillary Beckles. So I'm saying I can't take that foolishness.
Well, this is a fine example of good local television. Two celebrated historians having opposing views about a historical event and sharing those views with you, the viewing public.
Jackie was also the person who seemed closest to Joseph Pitt Washington Franklin, not Basso. Geographically, Harrow was situated near the vineyard or contented retreat where Franklin lived on the family estate, and from which he was taken by the military, charged with aiding and inciting the uprising, court-martialed and hanged. Bailey was far more distant from Franklin's base. Harrow, if you know where Harrow is, and Vineyard, as against Bailey's, real distant. So it might not have been Basso who was dealing with Franklin, but Jackie. And Jackie is the top gun as far as they're concerned. Jackie can't be too far below Basso. It was Jackie who was heard to say that Franklin would be made governor once the revolution was successful and that a house had been chosen for the governor. This was also an indication that Jackie and the warriors had long-range intentions to overthrow the system completely, because only then could the possibility of a warrior becoming the governor be possible. But that's dreaming again, that's dreaming heavy. Whether Jackie was manipulating Franklin, as has been suggested, whether they played mutually supportive roles, or whether Franklin was using Jackie to achieve his objectives, is left to interpretation and analysis, and cannot be approached through any facts other than those provided in the report. Who knows who manipulated who? Yeah, who knows? In these things, people can only draw assumptions.
The question of degrees of guilt is something you always have to look at. In a slave society, how do you measure degrees of guilt? You have men and women who pick up arms to free themselves. You have men and women who follow their leaders. You have men and women who were sympathetic but didn't particularly want to get involved. And being sympathetic in itself is a crime, because in a slave society you are expected to report and inform on any action designed to destroy the system.
Massa? Sammy, is it really necessary for you to accost me in this alarmist fashion?
Look, Massa, what it going? He just ran away.
Just to know and not to report, you could be executed for that. Okay? So you have this thing called degrees of guilt. And as I said earlier, when the slave owners went around the plantations mopping up and executing people in their hundreds. What they were saying is that everyone was guilty because all of you knew. And even if you were not involved, you had no arms, you were not part of a contingent, you were just in the field picking the sweet potato. The fact that you knew and said nothing, you are still guilty and you could be executed for that. The issue of degrees of guilt. We don't hear about Franklin after the colonizers' report. We don't see nothing of Franklin in the black folklore. We don't see him in the black press. We see the others, but we don't see him. And that is significant. I think we have to dig deep into that. I believe that Franklin was certainly in the ecosystem of the revolution. He was certainly in that ecosystem. He was in the space where this revolution was taking place, and he was obviously connected to people who were. Beyond that, we are stretching beyond that.
Historian Bobby Morris continues his support of the more lofty position for Franklin. To do this, he uses the examples of Franklin punishing the oppressors.
To draw the conclusion that Franklin was hanged based on some grudge of some unknown personal reason held by the Planner Classic, it seems to be neglecting and discounting the known political radicalization and activism of a man who was charged for beating a white man. All that is in Vaughan. A white man troubled his wife, and Franklin beat him too. All that, and now we say that Franklin nobody. You make it spoil, you gotta go back and see what Hilton Vaughan found. Hilton was a judge. So he had access to the records. I have never ever seen the records, those records that Hilton referred to. But I don't doubt Hilton. He was a judge. Then he go to these things, they will say, sure, Mr. Thing. If I go, they'll hide it from me. Some will hide it from me. But I can see where he was, as I said, with the free colors always up there. His name was always among them and so on. This is what they say. The attempt to reduce Franklin to a figurehead manipulated by blacks rather than to act him as a core conspirator and confidant of Jackie and likely Buster seems to be unwarranted. There's an alternative assumption that they operate as equals. The powerful slave driver with an army he controlled and the non-white agent of change, not in control of the slave army, but having a common cause and bringing needed skills to the revolutionary effort.
Now, having positioned all of the main characters, it is time for battle. It is now time to strike. Whether Jackie, Buster, or Franklin, it is action time.
The modus operandi that they have settled upon is that they are going to use the Easter holiday period as the occasion for the rebellion. And they are going to start the rebellion from Simmons and Bailey's. They're going to give the signal.
So that is the plan. We start to burn Cain and everything else on the night, April the 17th. Dingo, you'll be responsible for giving the men the signal.
But Bassa, what about that other estates? How they going to know about we plan?
That's where the rest want to come in. Travel around to the other estates and tell them that the planters will withholding freedom from the slaves. Tell them the only way to freedom is by burning the cane on April the 17th, the night time.
To storm the storehouses where weapons are kept, to storm the stables where the horses are kept, to take control of their plantation. And then they have arranged that armed as much as they could be armed by the arms on the plantation, they're going to meet at certain rendezvous points. And so the regiments of the enslaved are going to fall in. And then they're going to fortify the areas that they have taken control of. They are going to send detachments to take control of the roads from Bridgetown into those areas of the island. They are going to also storm the storehouses of the parish militias. They're going to take control of those arms, and they are going to destroy the system of slavery that has kept them in thraldom for close to 200 years. And the signal is going to be the burning of trash or cane fires on the plantation, simultaneous with they're going to unloose the windmills on the plantation. They're going to unlock the windmills. They're going to turn the arms of the windmill into the wind, and they're going to let loose the windmill. So the signal that the conspirators are waiting for on plantations all across the island is the burning of fires and the unusual singing of those windmills. And at 8 p.m. on Sunday, the 14th of April, 1816, Easter Sunday, they start burning the fires and the windmills start to turn. And that is the signal now for the enslaved to rise up on all of the plantations.
Buster, open, Buster.
Mingo?
Buster, the slaves start burning canes already. The rebellion like it start.
Why the 3 days ago before we...
Buster.
All right. You go and get John and the rest of them together. It is war remaking.
All right, Buster.
There is a perception based upon the slave owner's explanation, because part of the explanation is that what saved them from losing this war was the fact that circumstances had triggered the rebellion before the ideal moment. There is some speculation, I should say, not speculation, there is a deduction that can be made that when the Africans at Rock Hall Estate, Mount Wilton, prevented the Africans from the north of the island to connect to those in the center and south, forcing them to go through St. John on the way through, that strategic moment, the planning of the revolution went away, leading the Africans in the south of the island to move quicker than they had intended. But we have to investigate that further. What we do know is that unlike most of the other rebellions in the Caribbean that failed, and remember, in the first 50 years of Barbados as a slave complex, there were two major attempts to destroy slavery. There was the revolution that was planned in 1675 and the revolution that was planned in 1692. So the first two generations of Africans in Barbados had actually planned two back-to-back revolutions, and both of them were betrayed. Now, I have not seen any evidence to suggest that the notion of the rebellion starting prematurely was a result of betrayal. And that is very significant.
I came across a record that Caesar was held on a ship in Oystein Bay and was tortured by John Raycroft, Best, and others. He was one of the traitors too. He gave them all kind of information. That's clear to me. Because what the fellas did was to take some of the slaves that they questioned, put them on, they rented about 3 big ships, put them in Oystein Harbor, and used to bring all these people and put them to a court martial, man, torture, give us the facts, give us the information. So Caesar, I feel, was certainly a traitor, and it is said that Buster and them asked him to join them, but he refused to. So there were people in Buster's circle then, in the circle, who didn't take part in the revolution. and who did not agree with what he was doing. So somebody spilled the beans, man, and went and told. The other thing that you need to recognize too is that John Rycroft Best, and the second man was Mears, John Pollard Mears. These were the two heroes for the white people, the two leading planter class men who had to put down the revolt. All of them from St. Philip.
I have seen no proof or no narrative that said betrayal was a part of this revolution, which is why I keep making references to the mother of our rebellions. That here is an island-wide war planned in slavery by people who are enslaved, by people with a long tradition of betraying each other based on fear. But on this occasion, there was no evidence of betrayal among the 83,000 Africans on this island. That is an enormous political and philosophical fact that has to be studied and understood. Because, in a sense, it is phenomenal that it was not. It is phenomenal that it was not, especially given the fact that this was not tried in 100 years. That the people had not tried a project like this for 100 years. And if they had not tried it for 100 years, because, as I said, they were given concessions to give them the illusion of freedom, that they could move around the island, they could have domestic relations. And all of these concessions were given them to pacify them. But in the midst of a rebellion, you would imagine that some people would have said, but hold on a second, we like it like this. Some people would have said, but am I going to risk my domestic comfort for this project that you guys are planning? So you would imagine that in an environment like that, betrayal would have been the most common thing to expect, but there's no record of it. That would suggest to me that the planning of this revolution was absolutely not only sophisticated, but it had the popular will of the people. And that is the critical thing. And because it had the popular will of the people and was not betrayed and took place prematurely, that would tell you nonetheless that the resolve for freedom was at a phenomenal height in Barbados in 1816.
The University of the West Indies Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. What an interesting proposition. The beauty of research and the importance of deconstructing history. CBC TV 8, of course, is pleased to share it all with you. And that brings us to the end of this week's program of An Act of Great Courage. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time. I look forward to having you with us again next week.